Rose Clancy is making a name for herself in the Pittsburgh art community.
It's just a piece of junk, but something like this I might use.
Hers is not the conventional art of painting or sculpting, but the art of using reclaimed materials and abandoned urban lots, the objects and places others ignore or throw away, to tell the story of a childhood of sadness and neglect.
I knew I couldn't count on anybody, that there wasn't anybody that you could reach out to.
Rose's mother had severe and untreated mental illness, and it devoured the family.
I have to separate my mother from the illness simply because my mother was a beautiful person, and this illness just grew and became stronger as time went on. And it swallowed up that beautiful person, and it replaced her with somebody I didn't recognize.
Decades later, Rose is using her rather avant-garde creations to explore and express what happened to her and her siblings, and to help others whose families have been touched by mental illness.
So now what we need to do is pick the one most pressing problem that we
And there
see.
are many. And now families are finding support to know they're not alone in their struggles.
She has been diagnosed with bipolar disorder.
You grieve the life you thought you were going to have.
So you're drawing a lot?
Yeah.
Oh, nice.
Rose Clancy has a mission of sharing her grief through her garden.
The work I've done is powerful when someone comes to visit the garden and they share something really deep with me that they wouldn't share with anybody else, or they wouldn't share with a stranger. Like this horse has damage to it, but that damage is what's causing its beauty or making it special. What do you think, like that?
I think the art provides her sort of like a safe space to work through those things. Her real life and her story is really embedded in all those things.
But I do know that I've been given all these tools and the experience to put work out there that makes a difference for people.
This is the story of how a remarkable woman overcame an impossible childhood. Through her personal and unusual art, she has found peace and is helping others find their own healing. This is Rose's Garden. On Pittsburgh's north side, there's a garden. You might not notice it unless you're walking down the alley, but the people who live here know about it, and they've come to know the woman who made the garden. Rose Clancy found this vacant lot next to the Mattress Factory Museum and turned it into a thriving green space where people can come to pick some herbs for dinner, or enjoy the flowers, or just to talk.
I use plants to connect with other people. I use plants to be part of the healing process. I find that food and plants do that, naturally bring people together. It removes barriers between people.
I didn't know gingerman was a thing.
Rose is an artist, and this is her medium. It's called land art, a way in which spaces are reclaimed and materials are salvaged to make a statement. And although it is not literal, Rose's work here is saying something important and meaningful. She was raised by a mother with severe mental illness. Her childhood was filled with neglect and alienation and sadness.
I have the words for it, I know what happened, I know the timeline, but the thing that you can't take out of it is the emotion, is the sadness, is the pain. Those things don't go away. And that's what's important about the work I'm doing. I'm not doing it to express my pain. I'm doing it to let other people know that they can express their pain too, and it's okay. You have this sadness that's not going to go away. So respect it in that way, that it is something that deserves a place of respect, and that it's okay to feel it. You only have one mother, no matter what you do. You're only going to have that one mother. And that person should love you and trust you and get the same thing back from you. And that should be unconditional. And it was with my mother until the illness took it away.
Her family's story begins in Pittsburgh when Ruth Irene King met Thomas Patrick Clancy at an Irish dance in Squirrel Hill. She was working as a graphic artist and he was a bricklayer. They married in 1955, and the following year, their first child was born. They would have 7 more children in the next dozen years. While Thomas built houses, Ruth built a home. A newspaper article from the early 70s shows Ruth and her children making soap. Peggy was the baby.
My mom always could have been like the Martha Stewart 20 years before Martha Stewart was Martha Stewart. She was that articulate and that bright. She could bake, she could knit, she could make anything and everything, and she had the most wonderful ideas.
My mother was a beautiful human being who loved nature, who loved life, who loved people, who loved her children. And she was wonderfully creative in everything she did. You know, she taught me how to look at something, even the ugliest thing, and see beauty in it. It was a beautiful thing to go into the garden with her because she always told you different things. And
One of Rose's earliest memories is of her mother showing her how to play with snapdragons in the garden.
she pointed out that you could make snapdragons talk, that they could become animated characters. And she reached over and she took a snapdragon and she started making it talk. You know, you push on the throat a little bit and you can make it talk.
But as the family grew, Ruth's joy and energy began to fade. There were financial difficulties, problems in the marriage, and undiagnosed and untreated bouts of postpartum depression. And by the 1970s, Ruth's vibrant presence was being eclipsed by darkness and anxiety. When Rose was in high school, the family moved to a farm in Bentleyville. But the beautiful land and open spaces did not improve life for the family. Those who knew the family knew there was something wrong.
It was chaos. You never knew what to expect. You could walk into a room and things could be fine, or you could walk into a room and some bizarre, crazy argument would start happening. And there were so many of them that I don't even isolate them from each other anymore. I don't even remember ever doing homework at home. You know, it was not an environment where you could sit down and focus on studying. There was always some chore that had to be done, or some bit of bizarreness would happen.
One day, Rose was the victim of a cruel and terrifying event.
I just remember walking into the kitchen and my mom was laying on the floor. There had been fighting going on, so I was worried, that she wasn't responding. I was worried she had taken some pills and was going to die, and couldn't do anything to get her to respond. And my sister Kathy was in the room as well, and she did the same thing. We were trying to get her to respond, and we were gotten to the point of hysteria in that she was dying in front of us, and we couldn't do anything to bring her around. So we made a decision to call an ambulance. And when the ambulance pulled up in the driveway, you could hear the siren. And we're still trying to revive my mom. And then when she hears the siren, she just opens her eyes, gets up, and glares at us and says, "Don't ever do that to me again." And she walked out of the room and went into the other room. Then for 2 weeks after that, she acted as if we didn't exist totally. It was table set for 8, not for 10, things like that. And then one day it was over. That kind of was a turning point for me, and that was the last time I believed her. The last time I let her manipulate me emotionally into caring and, about her committing suicide.
How would you characterize your childhood?
Hopeless. There was a lack of hope. There wasn't even thinking about the future. As a parent, I feel you have a responsibility to your children. You're to raise them to be functioning members of society. You're to prepare them for the world, and that didn't happen. That didn't happen for me or any of my siblings. We weren't prepared for the world. I don't know how much thought was put into what is she going to do after, she leaves this house. My dad worked too much, and my mom was cut. This illness was taking her away from us.
The 60s and 70s were a different time. Mental illness was poorly understood, and there was little support. Rose knew there was no one she could count on. One by one, she and her siblings became adults and left the farm. Ruth got sicker, refusing treatment and medication, abandoning her gardens, and shutting herself off from the world. In 2007, she died.
an anxiety-ridden shell of a person, not even of a person. For a long time, I could look into her eyes and still see a glimpse of her, but the last few years of her life, couldn't even see that. So it completely devours the person that you are, you know, and replaces it with something that was a stranger to me.
I always felt helpless watching her go by, but in like every step of the illness just kind of took another piece of her, and that was very hurtful. I'm sad right now, more or less because I'm thinking about it. I often don't choose to think about it in that sense. I try to pull something good out of something bad.
Peggy finds peace in the garden now, growing vegetables in the same patch of land her mother had tended. Rose is finding peace in a different way, using art to tell the story of what happened.
It's about this ugly illness, but it's about her beauty too. It's what it did to her.
Using plastic packing material to make a scroll, Rose unfurled the misery of her mother's decline in a poem.
Desperately, she cried out for a savior as she was swallowed by the black sea of depression, unable to grasp the hands that reached out to her. Paranoia played her like a puppet, depleting her soul of love and trust, leaving only a shell, a hollow void. For the stranger, that's the part I can't deal with. That's the part I always have a problem with, okay. Hollow void, where the stranger that I did not recognize and could not love came to reside. Anxiety was the air in her lungs and the only thing with her when she took her last breath. Like a bright blue cotton dress, washed to an empty gray, she slowly faded and disappeared. It's a sculpture that I'm growing, so I'm actually creating the sculpture now.
The illness is a theme in almost all of Rose's work. There are tangerine trees planted so the roots don't mingle, a metaphor for how she and her siblings were never encouraged to know each other. There's the exhibit of water jugs taken from the farmhouse basement, a monument to Ruth's all-consuming fear that the world would end soon. And there's the garden lab, a monument of hope and healing.
The experiences I have in the gardens, like a lot of times what happens is the work I'm putting out there really allows people the freedom to open up and confide in me. Hi, welcome to the garden lab. I'm Rose. They see something in talking to me that I'm surprised by this. It happens so often that people will tell me really personal things about themselves without knowing me or just knowing me a little and trust that it's going to stay there, and it does. But I had one experience where someone I knew just a little bit came up to me and she said to me, you know, I've been diagnosed with major depression. I said, no. And she said, I've been medicated for years. And I said, no, I wouldn't have guessed. So to me, I can imagine what my mother would have been with a correct diagnosis and medication based on this other person that I've met and have gotten to know. This person is completely functioning and holds down a good job and, you know, is a creative person as well. But she's accepted that there was something she needed to address, you know, in the illness. So I have an example of what my mother could have been. You can get a glimpse of it right through here.
The garden has been an exercise in trust, too. Tucked away in the back of the lot is an Indian bust that Rose's mother made when she was in school.
It was a turning point for me today when a friend came and said, well, Rose, this is really nice, but I don't see you in this garden. And I kind of thought about that a bit, and I thought, well, I am holding back on trusting. And so I brought another object in first that I didn't really care about, just to see what would happen, and it wasn't bothered. So then the second object I brought in was the Indian bust, and I placed it in the gourd house, and no one has bothered it.
What does that tell you? that people are generally trustworthy, that it was safe for you to trust people?
It tells me more about myself, that here I am 50-some years old, and I'm still learning, I'm still healing. You know, like her death was 5 years ago, so the healing process has been rather intense in the past 5 years. But here, before I started this garden, I really thought, I've got it under control, I understand this healing, I'm okay. And then to come in here and then to be able to see that about myself.
People passing by won't necessarily call this art, But the garden is a way to connect, a leafy patch of common ground built upon Rose's childhood.
I'm the only one who can take that and channel it through and turn it into an expression. And if I was just doing it for myself, I would keep it quiet in my studio or in my house. But it's not about that. It's like I was given the gift to be able to do this, to be able to take the experience I've had and to use it, because I know the world needs help.
So it's letting other people know they're not alone.
Definitely, definitely. And it works both ways, because then I realize I'm not alone, and that helps me to heal too.
Mental illness brings isolation, and yet it is a universal problem.
She's living with me, and it has become a nightmare. It's a constant battle between us. She's disruptive in the house, has outbursts constantly.
On a recent evening, people gathered for a class at the North Pittsburgh offices of NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness. Each is facing the challenges of living with or raising a loved one who has mental illness.
What happens to my son, I can't guarantee, and I don't know how it's going to turn out. So I can't beat myself up about it.
This class, called Family to Family, offers support, helping family members find ways to solve problems, support the loved one in treatment, and, perhaps most importantly, keep their own peace of mind.
You'll see that things do get better. You move to a different place of acceptance. And even though you still go through these cycles of crisis again and again, you have more tools, you have more resiliency to deal with it.
This is no unique group, and their challenges, while troubling, are not particularly special. Chances are mental illness will touch each of our families at some time. NAMI estimates that 1 in 4 people will experience some form of mental illness in his or her lifetime, as many as 67 million Americans. The American Psychiatric Association has identified more than 400 kinds of mental illness, including anxiety, bipolar, depression, schizophrenia, autism, Alzheimer's, attention deficit disorder, and anorexia. The names are familiar and have become part of our cultural and social discourse.
If you continually do a circle of 5 people in your life and relationships that you have, almost guaranteed someone will have something. They've either had a bout of depression, somebody in their family committed suicide, their grandson has attention deficit disorder, and it goes on and on.
NAMI Director Chris Michaels says living with a mentally ill family member is always a struggle. But in the saddest cases, a child is being raised by a mentally ill parent.
As a child, you have a certain expectation of what your mother or dad should do for you, and it's that they should take care of you. And if nobody else is, your mother would. And when your mother's ill and can't take care of you, then sometimes the roles reverse when you end up trying to take care of her.
Michaels says all this would be easier for families if it weren't for the stigma that still clings to mental illness. For centuries, and continuing to the not-so-distant past, people with mental illness were often treated as demons, as possessed, as crazy. Scientists and doctors now know that mental illness is an organic sickness of the brain and should be regarded as an illness like any other.
The outpouring, if you have cancer or if you need a bone marrow transplant or something like that, there's lots of resources. They're readily accessible for you, and you want them. You want to reach out for them. If it's a situation where the person has a mental illness, it's sort of like you almost have the opposite effect. You don't want anybody really to know, because what would they think?
At the meeting that night, we met Cindy McComb, whose grown son has mental illness. At first, she tried to conceal that fact from those around her.
For some reason, I don't care. After maybe the first 2 years, I said, this is ridiculous that I can't tell people. I don't feel, that, people in the neighborhood don't know. So I just started blabbing, and it was really good for me.
We tend to lose sight that this is a person, and we always want to tie the mental illness, make that illness that person, which is not. It's a person who's experiencing different symptoms, A, B, C, or D.
Okay, so we have a lot of suggestions now.
The bright
Mary,
spot is
I'm
that
going
we
to ask
do
you
know
to
the treatment
think
works
through
and
these
people
things that we've written
recover,
down.
and more people are telling their stories of recovery. More and more people know about mental illness now than they did before. Young kids don't care. They don't necessarily care about race. They don't care about sexual orientation, and they don't care about mental illness either.
Well, we can work on it together. We're going to drill them down into here.
And maybe that's where some of the hope can be found, in the open minds of the
Right.
next generation. Amidst the challenges of her life, Rose Clancy raised a son, Kevin. He's an artist too, and he understands how the work has helped his mother come to terms with her own childhood, with a mother who was too sick to raise her well.
I've never viewed it as horrible. I know there are horrible things that happen, but the whole experience, I've never viewed it as like a tragedy or anything. I think it's part of life, and so many people go through it. It's a gradient, but so many people go through it. So I never saw it as like an abnormal thing. People's families are a little messed up. Everyone's family is a little messed up. So it's just where you are on that scale.
And nasturtium? Going back to when I was little, and I said, I would never do this to my children. I think that was always in my mind, that these things weren't right, and that children didn't deserve this. I didn't deserve this, my siblings didn't deserve it. Nobody deserves to be treated that way. And so when Kevin did come along, it was, this is going to stop. A lot of times it goes from generation to generation, patterns of behavior, and I just decided those were not patterns I wanted to continue.
For Rose, healing has come only with time and through hard work of planting and building and moving earth, and of using what is there to tell her story. She has dug up things, exposing roots of not only her plants, but of her own hurt feelings, to make something, if not empirically beautiful, then certainly meaningful. 5 years after her mother's death, Rose, the young girl who felt life was so hopeless, can see hope here.
I would just say, I'm not sure if it's hope or not, but I just know things changed when she passed away, that it was done. It was over. She wasn't in this state anymore, and I'm hoping she's in a better place. So maybe that's where the hope begins, is that you hope that the energy from a person, they're free from this kind of torture or this kind of illness, and they're able to be the beauty that they are, and wherever their energy goes after they die.
Rose says her mother would love this garden and all her work. Ruth Clancy was, after all, a gardener with a creative soul.
And my mother's nature was to be generous and kind. I mean, that was her beauty, and to think of others and to see the value in what you're going through. To appreciate what you have, no matter if you have a lot or a little. So you asked if she lives in my work. She lives in my work in that way. The example of taking nothing and turning it into something. Showing people there's power in that they can do it themselves.
Now that my grandma's gone, there's not that burden or that weight, and I think all of this stuff is really blooming. I see my grandma living on through all of this.
Parsley, basil, sage. My mom's life was so chaotic and towards the end tortured almost, and for as sad as her life ended up being, something has to come out of it that's good. And I always believe this, a good can come out of a bad. My mom always told me that.
I'm eternally grateful for both my parents and appreciative of what they did do, the good in them. And in the bigger picture of things, I think that we're all here for a reason. And if my reason is to make work that then communicates to others, to be able to release things that they're holding inside of themselves based on their experiences, then I can only be thankful for everything I've been through.